Input lag, button-to-pixel delay, and end-to-end system latency are some of the terms used by gamers to describe how responsive a game feels. Testing system latency used to be a very expensive and extremely time-consuming process. Even with a small sample size of just 20 tests, the entire process could easily take more than 2 hours. This is why these tests usually focus on just 3 values: the longest or maximum delay, the average delay, and the shortest or minimum delay. While that data is very useful, it does not tell us anything about how stable or predictable the end-to-end latency of a system is. To look into that, I must increase the sample size, which is now finally possible thanks to NVIDIA's new latency measuring tool called LDAT. With LDAT, I can now increase the sample size from 20 to 200, and instead of spending many hours counting frames to get the results, I can see them in real time on the monitor of a second PC. So in today's video, which was kindly sponsored by NVIDIA, I use Fortnite to show you how the frame rate and the refresh rate of your monitor not only affect how responsive a game feels, but also how stable and predictable that response to your input is. All tests were done at 1080p with the low graphics preset, VSync and G-Sync were disabled, the in-game frame rate limiter was used to lock the frame rate at a specific value, and the reflex low latency mode was disabled as the system was never GPU bound in any of the tests. So with a sample size of 200, a refresh rate of 60 Hz and the frame rate locked at 60 FPS, I measured a maximum delay of 44.7 milliseconds, an average delay of 28.9 milliseconds, and the minimum or shortest delay of 11.5 milliseconds. But when I show you the values of all 200 samples, then it gets clear that system latency is about more than just the longest, average, and shortest delays. The standard deviation helps us to quantify how stable or consistent the end-to-end latency of a system is, as it gives us a range around the average value inside which 68% of the measured latency values fall. So when we add that info here, then at 60 Hz and 60 FPS, 68% of all measured values fall between 36.4 and 21.5 milliseconds. This then helps us to understand how stable or predictable the system latency is. Now, when I keep the refresh rate at 60 Hz and only change the in-game frame rate limiter from 60 to 144 FPS, then this leads to less system latency and less variation, as the standard deviation is also lower now. The same is true when I increase the frame rate even further to 240 or 360 frames per second. Again, the system is never GPU bound, as it is powerful enough to achieve and maintain these frame rate limits at less than 90% load on the GPU. Now, how is it possible to reduce system latency by having a game run at a frame rate that exceeds the refresh rate of your monitor? Games process input at the same rate as your frame rate, which means that when you increase the frame rate, the game will process input more frequently, and so there is less delay. But there is another factor. When a refresh occurs, then the monitor does not instantly update all its pixels to display a new image. During a refresh, the display gets updated line by line. That image comes from the front buffer of your graphics card. When the monitor starts a refresh, then it scans the front buffer line by line and updates the pixels on the display. Then the next image enters the front buffer, a new scan out happens, and so on and so forth. This high-speed recording shows what it looks like with VSync or G-Sync enabled. Keep an eye on the vertical line on the left side of the monitor, which shows how the monitor updates the display line by line with every refresh. But in my tests I did not use VSync nor G-Sync, and so the frame rate exceeded the refresh rate of the display. At 60 Hz and a frame rate of 144 FPS, the following happens. While the monitor scans the front buffer which contains image A, the graphics card pushes image B to the buffer. As the monitor runs at a fixed refresh rate of 60 Hz, it just continues with the scan. And so now we have a slice of image A and a slice of image B on the display. But while the monitor is still scanning the front buffer, the graphics card finishes rendering image C. And so you end up with another slice of a different image on your display. So besides the game processing input faster at higher frame rates, this is the other reason why running a game at a frame rate that exceeds your monitor's refresh rate reduces system latency and makes it more stable at the same time. Of course, there's an ugly side effect to this, called tearing. If you increase the frame rate further, like 240 FPS at 60 Hz, then this leads to even more slices of different images ending up on your display during one refresh cycle. That means more tear lines and an image that just doesn't feel clean nor smooth. The obvious solution is a monitor which supports a higher refresh rate, which updates more frequently and so reduces the number of slices of different images that end up on your display during one refresh cycle. Now, how does a higher refresh rate affect system latency? When we compare the results from the test with 144 FPS at 60 Hz to the results from 144 FPS at 144 Hz, then you can see that not only were the delays reduced by increasing the refresh rate, more importantly, the higher refresh rate also caused less variation, and so the system latency got more stable. Furthermore, the results from 144 FPS at 144 Hz also beat 360 FPS at 60 Hz. When you increase the frame rate past 144 FPS, while you keep the refresh rate at 144 Hz, then the system latency continues to get lower and more stable. 240 FPS at 240 Hz also has less delay and less variation than 240 FPS at 144 Hz. Increasing the frame rate to 360 FPS at 240 Hz also further reduces the delay and makes it more stable. But you see that the gain gets smaller as we continue to increase the refresh rate. And as expected, 360 FPS at 360 Hz, which is the fastest refresh rate you can get right now, provides the lowest and the most stable system latency in these tests. So as these results show, you can further reduce system latency by increasing the frame rate past the refresh rate of your display, though you will get tearing then. If you already play games at 144 FPS on a 60 Hz display, then by upgrading to a 144 Hz monitor, you can instantly reduce system latency and get it more stable and predictable at the same time, which is especially helpful in games that depend on precise timing. With the 144 Hz monitor, it then also makes sense to think about G-Sync, which prevents tearing. If you want to reduce system latency further, while at the same time making it more consistent, you have the option to go for a 240 Hz or even a 360 Hz monitor. Just make sure that you also have a CPU and GPU which can provide and maintain the required frame rates to get the most out of these monitors. Finally, when we take a look at all the samples of the 60 FPS at 60 Hz, 144 FPS at 144 Hz, 240 FPS at 240 Hz, and 360 FPS at 360 Hz tests, then you can see how the delays get lower and are less spread out as I increase the frame rate and the refresh rate. And that's all for today. Big shout out to Nvidia for sponsoring today's video and their push for reducing system latency. I also want to thank my fine patrons for their awesome support, and if you would like to join them, then you can find the link to my Patreon page in the description. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like, subscribe for more, ring the bell to get notified when I upload my next video, and I hope to see you next time. Until then, have a nice day and take care. My name is Chris, and this was Battle Nonsense.